Hello, everyone. My name is Hilary Withers, and for my Irish authors presentation today, I will be discussing Come Gentle Night by Emma Donoghue. Donoghue was born in Dublin in 1969. She was educated at University College of Dublin and University of Cambridge. She has won several awards and been nominated for many more for her writings since she started. And she's been prominent in Irish postmodern feminist literature for several decades now. So, the short story that we'll be discussing today, Come Gentle Night, was published in 2002 in this compilation, a collection of short stories called The Woman Who Gave Birth to Rabbits. Come Gentle Night takes its name from a line in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, which is spoken at one point during the narrative by the protagonist's husband, John Ruskin. Our protagonist is Euphemia Gray. So the story takes place in 1848 in Scotland, and it spans just the few hours between when the couple leaves their wedding feast up until they retire for the evening. Come Gentle Night is a line spoken by Juliet in the Shakespeare play, and the line being taken from Juliet herself points to one of the foundational commonalities that all of the short stories in the collection share, and that is that all have central protagonist female central protagonists. So the perspective is solidly feminine. Whether they narrate their own story or they are the focus of third person narration, the women's experiences are the cornerstone and study of this book, and that gives the text as a whole a clear feminist scope. So the stories told, including Come Gentle Night, are those of both known and unknown, but commonly disregarded or misrepresented women throughout about a 700-year span of Irish and British history. What I believe Donoghue has done with this collection and Come Gentle Night specifically is to use the Irish historical fiction short story genre in a way that allows her to subvert the patriarchal structure that these women both lived their lives within and subsequently had their stories either told or overlooked within. And she does this while using and highlighting several key features of both the genre as well as key features of the larger feminist tradition, including looking at ways in which patriarchy seeks to control and subjugate women by reclaiming the lives of the women through rewriting their stories. Um, she looks at how historical fiction and short stories, more specifically, lend themselves perfectly to this purpose, and how through using them, we can examine the very blurred, murky lines or boundary between truth and lies. So I would like to look at all of those elements within her writing and in her purpose by finding examples of them all within Come Gentle Night. So, patriarchy is first and foremost concerned with controlling and subjugating women. In Come Gentle Night, there are two ways in which Effie is dominated by her husband, John. The story is based on The Short Unhappy Marriage of Euphemia Gray and art critic John Ruskin. The website Art UK has a really good, if rather simplified, introduction to the events that surrounded their marriage. So, if you're not familiar with the story, I encourage you to read that short background so that you can have a little more information about what's happening here. But in essence, the two were married, and for 6 years, John refused to consummate the marriage. Over those years, he gave Effie a lot of different reasons for this, um, all of which I feel fall into one of the two ways in which patriarchy most often succeeds in its aim to control and subjugate women. Those are first the controlling or containing of the female body, and second, using women's historically more limited access to language and education against them. So I'd like to look at both of those methods within Come Gentle Night. First, containing the female body. On their wedding night, John makes several what you could call decrees, in reference to Effie's person, and he states these as dictates, effectually giving Effie no choice in any of these matters. Um, First, he decides for her that she will be called by a new name, Effie, right? Instead of the old nickname Femi, which her family seems to be in the habit of using, he states, Effie, I've named you, and Effie, you'll stay. Unfortunately, this is it's not something that our society's done away with yet. We still see it today. When I read the story, it reminded me of Tom Cruise's attempt several years ago to rename his then wife, Katie Holmes, Kate. His reasonings for this, he stated, were that she was now a childbearing woman. And so Kate was more appropriate because Katie was a little girl's name. So almost 200 years later, we have a very prominent and analogous example of the same kind of renaming. Um, Effie's husband also relates that he will be the one to decide or determine whether or not she is strong enough to bear the stress of hiking in high altitudes, in their upcoming trip to the Alps. Um, he claims that he won't allow her to become pregnant at this time because the physical condition might delay or interrupt their trip in some way. Um, Adding to that, that he believes her body is still too young and too weak to safely undergo marital relations at this time. Um, and finally, he asks rather than informs her, or informs her rather than asks her, sorry, that she must be tired and she should go to bed because she'll need all of her strength for their early start in the morning. So, all of these are examples of him using her smaller female body as an excuse to control her, in the ways that he wants to. The second key element or key way in which patriarchy seeks to dominate is by using that superior command of language and knowledge. And when Effie, in the carriage ride before they arrive at the hotel, asks John about the current political climate and whether or not this might mean bloodshed or war for Britain, he immediately dismisses her and asks her who's been putting that nonsense into your head. Um, Now, if a man had asked that question, it wouldn't have been nonsense. It would have been a valid political conversational question, and he would have answered it. Um, but when Effie does it, it's something that a woman should not think or worry about. Another way or excuse he gives her to not consummate the marriage really is that she must bow to his superior knowledge or superior discernment of a man. Because she may not realize all of the risks entailed in marital relations, where he does realize this because of his superior education, right? So he also decides for the both of them that their marriage will not be based on physical relations, but based instead on spiritual principles. So here we have him claiming a right to deny Effie her own thoughts, opinions, feelings, desires, um, on the ground that he has more education and more knowledge of the world than she does. So eventually, the real life Effie Gray successfully has the marriage annulled, which is no small thing in Victorian times, on the grounds of non consummation. And Ruskin never denied this. He accepted those charges, even as embarrassing as they must have been during those times. So I suppose we have to give him a bit of credit there for that. But this story focuses on Effie's experiences, not John's. And likewise, all the other stories in the text do as well. And giving such prominence to women's lives in her work, Donahue is trying to set to right, I think, the wrongs done to them, the injustices done to them. Now, those injustices can look two different ways. It can be wrongs done to them during their lifetimes, but it can also be the ones done afterwards. That is, the being pushed aside and deemed effectually unimportant during the initial writing down of history and the subsequent telling of historical events later in historical texts. So Donahue also does something with this specific story that I really enjoyed, and that is in her notes section. And we'll talk a little bit more about notes section later, but for the notes in this particular story, she does not focus on Effie's trials as John's wife. Instead, the notes basically start with the fact that Effie successfully had the marriage annulled. And they go on from there to tell us, rather than her trials, all of her triumphs. That she remarried, that it was a long and happy marriage, that there were 8 children that came out of that marriage. So Donahue doesn't leave Effie stuck in that forever victim space. She shows Effie that as having the courage and finding the resources to rescue herself and in the end have the marriage annulled. And that's a powerful message, even for women of our time, let alone almost 200 years ago. So if we accept that Donahue's primary purpose here was to contribute to the feminist work of reclaiming these women's lives through rewriting their stories, then there are some very distinct reasons why the genre of not just historical fiction, but short story historical fiction was an ideal medium for her to work within. Historical fiction is often challenged or denied the same status as other literary genres. I want to get her name right. Scholar Milda Dante discusses in her article all writers are border walkers, the muddy line that we draw between the borders of history and fiction. And she discusses how well Donahue navigates that border, how she's able to walk across the lines and back and forth between them in a way that is really successful for her purposes. Critics often claim that the more academic field of historical writing supposedly provides an objective view of the past that stems from research and documented sources. And so, as such, it should be viewed as fundamentally superior to historical fiction. But that reasoning is um, problematic at best. Um, we've come to realize, and hopefully it's becoming one of those truths universally known, that the writers of history cannot be wholly objective. Far from it. When documenting what we consider fact, our beliefs, our cultures, our values, even our age and our gender, family status, socioeconomic status, all of these elements inform and shape, first of all, what we see and experience in the moment, but also what we remember and place the most importance upon later on. So we have to ask ourselves then, when reading historical texts, from what perspective is this narrative told? Whose interests are being served? Who is privileged and who excluded? Who benefits from those exclusions? Why is the historical record so often incomplete? Well, it's because those exclusions are purposeful, whether consciously or unconsciously. There are ideological motivations at work when any human being attempts to write down or record historical events. So, all historical records then can be seen, in effect, I would argue, as a type of lie of omission. And in the case of patriarchy, that lie is that events are often male dominated, male centered, large scale, but at the same time narrowly focused on those large scale events. So if objectivity in history is just simply not possible. But as a writer of fiction, Donahue allows herself to use this to her advantage. She illustrates how entwining fact and fiction might be the only real way to reach a deeper, more genuine understanding of historical events. One way she does this, and it's a rather unique quality of her writing, is that she inserts the note sections that I touched on briefly earlier, but she does this so that both the historical and the fictional are valued. Perhaps not equally, but they're both there. Historical fact, fictional narrative are shown next to each other so that the reader can identify the strengths and the weaknesses of each, compare them, examine them together, and hopefully come up with a more, if not a more complete, then at least a more multifaceted version of events in their minds. Um, it's not usual. Like I said, it's a unique component of Donahue's writing because it's not usual for historical fiction authors to show the historical record and say, this is where fact ended and my imagination began. This is where there was a gap in the record, and this is what I believe could have filled the gap. So that kind of blending of fact and fiction is leads perfectly to the idea of a very ephemeral and shifting nature of truth and lies. My question is historical academic history truth while historical fiction a lie? Donahue's stories seek to take historical figures, well known and unknown, infamous, and having no more known about them than the mere fact of their existence, and create private thoughts, feelings, inner lives, reactions to fill in any and all gaps within the historical record. But no matter how much or how little history claims to know about these women, the known facts in Donahue's work are shown as secondary to the narrative, the fictional narrative. She gives prominence to one over the other. Um, the accepted facts appear as notes, mere appendices after the story itself. And as such, they take on a kind of a subordinate quality to the more important imaginative um, reality invented by Donahue. So the notes for Come Gentle Night also take up barely half of a page, while the story itself is 13 and a half pages long. And like I said, the notes are found after the story rather than as a preface to the story. So that kind of placement gives the reader the idea that Donahue values the narrative over the historical fact. It gives us a good idea of where Donahue believes we should be spending most of our time and energy. Um, like I mentioned before, history through a patriarchal lens is large scale and male dominated. On the other hand, Donahue's focus primarily upon women is the opposite. It proves that important events can be at the same time small scale because women's lives were much more confined in space, but also broader in perspective, which is why the short story genre is so perfect for this purpose. Short stories are small, but they are many. Um, and it allows us to look at so many more different perspectives on the same event. And like I said, hopefully gives us a much more multifaceted view of those events. So when Donahue does this, she has no choice but to imaginatively reconstruct the inner lives of the women. Does that then automatically make those lives a lie? Um, my answer would be a definitive no, but you have to decide that answer for yourself. It is a complicated question, and one with critics on both sides, and there's not an easy answer. So that's where the feminist work of reclaiming and rewriting comes in. Authors like Donahue retell historical events through the eyes of women, and they have no choice but to invent to the best of their ability the inner thoughts and feelings of those women, and in many cases, the outer actions of those women, because too often there's simply not a historical record of women's contributions to events. In their work, scholars Debbie Brauchman and Elke Decore, didn't want to get their names wrong either, discuss how literature like Donahue's is a conscious attempt to finally give a voice to women who have been marginalized, misrepresented, or even forgotten about altogether. Donahue calls her story scraps, flotsam and jetsam, saying that the women whose stories she has chosen to tell have been written off as nobodies. And she takes those as her starting point. and offers us a perspective on history that differs from the male dominated one that we're so used to. It's like focusing on um, the battle versus on focusing on the outcome, how the outcome of that battle will affect the individuals and the community who are on the outskirts of the battle. Um, there is a video on YouTube called um, shoot strange or uh, sticky questions, basically, that Donahue did that I encourage you to watch. I'll give you at the end. I'll show you the reference for that so you can look it up. But while she doesn't discuss Come Gentle Night specifically, um, she does talk about why most of her stories center on family relationships of some kind. And that directly connects to this idea of patriarchal, male dominated history versus her version of female history and how that affects individuals and communities in smaller spaces. Because she says that she focuses on family not because, as we would initially think, not because women's lives were so focused and even defined and confined by the family, but because family in all its different forms is the most important story of human life, not women's lives, but human life, um, because it's one of those universal truths. Um, we all have come from and live our lives within a family of one kind or another. So, this full idea that she finds incredibly important because we as a society um, not only need to realize and value family more, but writers of history need to realize two things. One, that the story of family should be the center of around which history is written. And two, that women's history is not women's history, but human history. And we cannot gain a deeper understanding of history or learn from it if we aren't able to enter the lives of the men and women who were there, actually there during those events. And that's what historical fiction gives us. It gives us a chance to enter the lives of those that we're studying. And short story, historical fiction, gives us the chance to not only enter one life, but many. And Donahue's feminist focus, short story, historical fiction, allows us to enter the lives of many women, which is unique and not seen often, nearly often enough. So, as you read Come Gentle Night, keep in mind these elements that we've talked about: the impact of patriarchy on the lived experiences as well as the told experiences of women, how that patriarchal structure is used by John against his wife Effie. Keep in mind how historical fiction and short story can help us reimagine historical events through the plethora of individuals who experienced them, not just the one. And also keep in mind the blurred lines that separate, the very blurred lines that separate truth and lies, especially when we're talking about written histories. I want to quickly show you the works cited, the works that I discussed and mentioned. Here is the Art UK website that you can get a little bit of background on Effie's story. And here is the Emma Donoghue Touchy Subjects interview that I highly recommend. The other works are fantastic as well if you have the desire to read more about Effie. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy Come Gentle Night by Emma Donoghue.